Hello. Bear with me. My name is Felix, and I'm here today to talk about Ledger. If you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. I'm just gonna make sure we get my screen up as well, so bear with me, my camera as well. But if you guys have any questions about Ledger devices or anything like that, you can pop them in the chat. We'll try to get those answered as best we can. I think the other thing would be that I always mention would be not to give out your 24 words and not to sign any transactions you don't trust. But let's get going. We'll see how we go as people roll in. I see a couple of questions already. First two questions actually seem to be very similar. So let's get started. First one is from Nuno and Steve Dodd. Hi Nuno and Steve. They mention in particular, how can you store HBAR on a Ledger device or Ledger Nano X for Nuno in particular. Now I actually brought up this in particular, and I'm just going to bring up that up for us now. Let's have a look. Let's go from here. So I can see there's a little bit of the mention about the audio, so we'll sort that out as well. Just trying to fix that up on my end. But you can see here how we can store HBAR with the Ledger device in particular. Now, one thing to mention is that we wouldn't be doing anything with entirely all within Ledger Live. We'd actually have to go through and create an account. We can do that with Hashpack in particular. There are potentially other services that you might need to use, but you can first of all create the account. Make sure you do that with Hashpack, and then once you do that going forward, you can actually go about and add that with Ledger Live going forward. So that should be able to get you sorted out in terms of storing HBAR. Remembering also that your assets are never going to be on the device itself. They're actually going to be on chain, and what you actually store on your device is going to be your recovery phrase that your private key is generally derived from. So hopefully that answers your questions, both Nuno and Steve. If you guys want me to go into more detail, definitely try to do that as well. But that should be able to get you all started. We might see if we can get this through without my face on camera. I'm sure you guys won't mind that. It should be okay for now, and we'll keep going. But next question, Ron Owens. You've mentioned, hey, can you have 3 Ledger devices on one Ledger Live installation on a PC? And indeed you can. What I'm actually going to do is actually bring up this in particular. This is my instance of Ledger Live, for example. And what you can actually see, if I roll downwards, is that my accounts are all going to be named in particular. And what I've done is I have multiple versions. I have like a hot wallet. I have my personal wallet as well, right? And so you can actually add as many accounts from different devices as you'd like, and you can manage that from there. So it's totally possible, nothing wrong with that at all, and you should be able to manage multiple devices with one instance of Ledger Live. You can add accounts from the same Ledger device on multiple instances of Ledger Live. And you can even have multiple, like your friends' accounts added into Ledger Live as well, into the same instance of Ledger Live. So there's a whole bunch of range of things that you can do with that. So no worries about that at all, Ron. If you have any trouble with adding accounts, definitely let us know. But generally speaking, you might go add account here, and then you can actually pop that through here. So totally possible. Don't worry about you managing your assets with multiple devices or anything. I always make sure to mention to actually go about and add your own name. And the reason for that in particular is that they always get set with like Ethereum 1, Ethereum 2, whatever it might be. And it can be really confusing if you have lots of devices, lots of accounts, and lots of addresses you want to manage. So just something to keep in mind. That'd be what I'd suggest. Let's keep going. CJ, good morning, GM to you too. And I've got another question here. Hopefully that echo shouldn't be an issue for you anymore. Looks like it's all good. Thanks for the heads up. The other question seems to be from Nate. You mentioned hi. I'm sure this has been asked, but I would like to know if Lightning Network will be added. I wouldn't be able to say if it would be added in terms of time frame or anything, but I'll definitely make sure to mention that it is something that you're looking for, Nate. So it isn't something that's supported directly within Ledger Live or with your device at the moment, but it would be something we can look towards in the future potentially. So definitely I will keep that in mind. Let's keep going. I think 007 Bond, I do remember your name in particular. You mentioned you were cashing out ERC20 token. Is this the correct way? Let's say, first of all, that there's never going to be a correct way, just what you would be wanting to do, but let's keep going. You've mentioned, let's say here, you've used the swap function here, and you're swapping Ethereum via 1inch. Oh, so that's not going to be here. It could either be in the Discover section within Ledger Live, like you've mentioned, or it could be on the website itself. Now, you've sent ETH to the exchange after that, and then exchange to cash. That sounds pretty standard to me. I don't see anything wrong with that process in particular, 007 Bond. But there could be other ways. For example, if you want to get it directly into your account as fiat, you could even use something like uHodler as well. That's a way that you can get a loan for your assets, 90% LTV, so loan to value ratio you can see here. And in that way, you can actually just give them collateral of that ERC20 token if it's supported. Otherwise, like you've done, you can swap it to ETH and then have that be deposited to you in cash if it's supported for your location. So something to consider as another way. You can potentially use go directly to the exchange if you want to with the ERC20 token as well. So a bunch of ways you can do that in particular. All right, so let's keep going. I know, Lockie, you have a question there that whether there will be a Ledger Stax restock coming up soon. Now, we haven't actually gone about and shipped the devices, so there's no restock necessarily, but it's definitely something, if you're talking about it being able to pre-order the devices pre-order the devices again. I wouldn't be able to say when that would be. I know you mentioned, will there be one soon? Just to know that we obviously want to make sure we get out the products to you that we think are best in class and are able to do all the things that we want them to do. We want them to be able to do for you. Support, NFTs as a picture there, or have it be really a good UX experience. So we're just making sure that it's the best product before we send it out to you guys. So no time frame, unfortunately, Lockie. I wish I could be more specific on that one, but definitely keep an eye out. You can always hit us up on Twitter, or keep an eye out rather on Twitter and stuff, and we're always going to be the first ones to shout out about that when that does come up. All right, if I keep going here, we'll see if we can answer any more questions. I've got there we go. EJ Kudo, you said you can't download the XTC app on any of my Ledger, I'm assuming Ledger Nano S devices in particular. I think the first thing, EJ, I'd be thinking of would be, let's say if we jump over to instance of Ledger Live, you're jumping into my ledger. I'm assuming I'm going to plug mine in right now. And what we'd be looking for is, the XDC app. We'd be wanting to make sure that not only is your Ledger Live up to date, so the latest version of Ledger Live at the moment is 2.55.0, at least on desktop. Now that would you'd also want to make sure that your Ledger device is up to date as well, and that way you'll be able to install the correct version of the XDC app as well. So might need to get a little more information there, EJ. Are you getting any error messages? Are you is there anything going awry with the device, especially if it's an older firmware? So those are the first things that I think of in particular, where you couldn't install the XDC app. If it's out of space, are you able to uninstall the other applications so that you can install the XDC app? I don't have my Ledger Nano S device with me right now, but knowing, I already have this installed, there shouldn't be any thing in particular that should be stopping you, other than those things that maybe came to mind. So generally, version that you're using, and the space that you might have on the device as well, EJ. So might come back if you have any more information. Yes, you said you get an error message. So what would the error message be in particular? That might help us try to troubleshoot that for you. Generally speaking, it should give some more information, especially if it's space related. We might want to uninstall some of the other applications so we can fit the XDC app. Otherwise, if it says it's disconnected, we might want to check and try and troubleshoot the issue. So let's say if it's saying it's disconnected, is there a issue where the device is turning off and being disconnected? Would we have tested multiple USB ports, USB cables, just to see if we can isolate the issue? Normally is how I like to think about it. So hopefully we can get to the bottom of that. You can always get a hold of us. Support.ledger.com would be the way. And then also you can have a chat with us on the website there, or you can send us an email as well. So if it needs to be more specific for you, EJ, you can do that there. And being that I don't have my camera seeming to appear right now, you'll be able to see it at the bottom right here on the Contact Us button in particular. So hopefully my general mentions hopefully would be able to help, but if not, definitely get a hold of us there. Now, if we keep going, Aris mentions, does MetaMask has to be Ledger Live? I'm not sure, so I'll try to mention the general things that we normally encounter with MetaMask and Ledger devices. Now, that being said, Ledger Live is another type of wallet, in the same way that MetaMask is. It's another way to interact with your Ledger device. So MetaMask wouldn't be supported within Ledger Live. That would just be two similar things trying to work together. But if you're trying to connect your device, so without importing your recovery phrase, you can use and manage addresses that you might normally do in MetaMask without importing your recovery phrase with your Ledger device. So that's kind of what these steps here that I've just searched up would do. Normally, when I'm talking to customers, I talk about it as in connecting your hardware wallet to manage a specific address. So that is definitely something you can do. And if you wanted to manage a MetaMask address within Ledger Live, while it is possible, it's not really something that I actually say is recommended. The reason being is that the address that's created within MetaMask, so normally it's 12 words potentially, has been on a PC or some digital device before. And that means that if the computer was compromised, then that an attacker or someone that has access to your device would be able to read the recovery phrase in plain text. Now, Hopefully it's unlikely that your device would have been compromised, but the reason we personally here at Ledger stray away from that is because you want to make sure it's secure, you want to make sure it's safe, and so we generally, if you have a Ledger device and you want to put assets and manage assets with it, we would generally recommend that you set it up as a new device, and then that way you get a new recovery phrase to be able to manage your assets accordingly. That's never been on anything digital. So that's the general gist there. I know I kind of waffled a bit for that one. If I didn't answer your question, hopefully I can get some more information there, Aris, and we can go from there. Now, let's keep going. We've got Richardson. You've mentioned you can download the XDC app, but you can't figure out how to transfer over without it going under ETH. Now, the reason you might see XDC as an Ethereum-based token in Ledger Live is that we can actually go onto our supported tokens page, and you'll see that XDC. So this is a great tool actually to just check what might be and might not be supported. But you can see here XDCE, so the ERC20 implementation of XDC is supported in Ledger Live, but if you wanted to use XDC on its native network, so it's a different network than Ethereum mainnet, you might need to use something like My Ether Wallet. My Crypto also works, and these third-party tools that would allow you to connect your Ledger device without importing your recovery phrase again, in the same way that you wouldn't do so with your MetaMask wallet. And that way you can select the type of network you want to connect to and go from there. So that would potentially be why you can't figure out how to transfer it. That's why it's specifically under the Ethereum account, specifically because it would be an Ethereum mainnet token. If you wanted to use another wallet to be able to manage that asset, yes, you can use My Ethereum wallet, for example, and that should be okay from there. So hopefully that does answer the question, Rhett. I know it's a bit, might not be the answer you would have been hoping for in particular, but since it's not supported in Ledger Live, that would be what you'd be able to do to manage that asset accordingly. Now, next question I have is with regards to a referral. I want to ask something about refer a friend. Can I get the reward of $10 from the gift card if I referred myself to buy a new ledger? I don't have that information off the top of my head. To be honest, I might actually suggest that you actually contact us. We can try and liaise with the guys internally to make sure. I don't want to speculate or anything like that with regards to this specific answer. Don't want to get your hopes up or say anything that might be flat out incorrect. So I think in this case, it might be best to get a hold of us there. support.ledger.com. Normally, a lot of the guys will have a line internally where we can try to get the specific answer for you for that in particular. But if we keep going, next we've got Ron. Oops, my bad there. Sorry about that, guys. We have Ron Owens. You've mentioned that you have 35 accounts installed in Ledger Live. So I'll pop back over just to give it an idea. Now, you've mentioned it's with the Ledger Nano X device. So I'm assuming the recovery phrase that you've added these with is with one device. Can you move half of them to a new Ledger Nano X? You can indeed move the assets over to a new Ledger Nano X if it has a new recovery phrase. All right. So if you want to send assets between addresses, it'd just be the same process you might do previously, where you send an asset going forward. Now, I know you mentioned half though. Now, this might be a little bit different because the other way that I was thinking of is that you can go about and restore an existing ledger device, or a new ledger device rather, with an existing recovery phrase. This would mean that you'd transfer or rather put the existing recovery phrase on a new device, meaning that that new device would also have access to all of the accounts that the existing recovery phrase would. If it's going to be half, then you are going to have to make a transfer on chain from one account to another. Wouldn't be any other way around that, because once you the addresses and the accounts that you have access to, or that the recovery phrase has access to, is able to derive the public-private key pair. Doesn't change, it's deterministic. So you're going to either have to, if you are okay with moving all of it, then you can just restore the existing recovery phrase onto the new device. But if you need to move half, then you get the new device, you set it up as a new device, and then you'd send all of the assets that you want to send to the new device accordingly. So that would have to be the way that you'd send specifically half to a new Nano X. That, I would make sure to mention, would have a new recovery phrase. If it has the same recovery phrase, then it would have access to the same accounts. So hopefully that answers your question. If there's anything more specific that you need to do, you can always let us know as well. Now, if I keep going, I've got Dill EI. You've mentioned you've been having an issue for a few months with the Wallet Connect QR code scanning, and it doesn't come up, and you're always prompted to copy a URI. So the most recent Ledger hardware wallet, I'm assuming that's the Ledger Nano X, doesn't seem to solve it. How can I potentially fix this? So generally speaking, if you're going to be scanning a Wallet Connect QR code, because generally speaking, you'd be doing that for the Ethereum account on mobile, and you'd be copying the URI on the Ledger desktop. If you're having issues in general with that, I might be best to get a hold of us, because I might want to, if I was troubleshooting this on my own, see exactly the process that you're doing this for. So just to give others a preview, the Wallet Connect is here, and you can see this is the V1 where you'd copy the URI, or actually, because the V1 isn't the most reliable, there is also something that, if you're not aware, the Wallet Connect V2, which hopefully will be a lot more stable for you. So it might be something to consider if you want to use the newer version. You can give this a try as well, unless that's already something you're using. Just thought I'd mention that in particular, but definitely something that I'd want to delve deeper with you, Dill IY, to see if we can try to get that fixed. Generally speaking, there shouldn't be anything on the hardware side. My general normal tips would be to make sure your Ledger Live, your firmware is up to date, and other than that, we might need to be more specific about it in particular deal. So hopefully we can get you all sorted. Next, we have Quantum Variant. You've mentioned, is it possible to transfer NFTs using the Ledger Live app? It is indeed possible to use the Ledger Live app. You'll just need to make sure that you'd be connecting your Ledger device. So depending on how you'd connect it, if you're using Android, for example, you can connect via USB. If you're using iOS, you might be connecting with your Ledger Nano X via Bluetooth. Definitely, generally speaking, an issue with regards to the connection. So this is actually, I actually just clicked this by accident, but this is something in particular, address poisoning, that wouldn't be necessarily relevant to you. But if you're seeing weird NFTs come out of your account, that's what it would be related to. But if I where is it here? It would actually be the same, because assets would be in general. There we go, and you should be able to send it as per usual. Just making sure, when you're sending anything in Ledger Live, that on the device itself, you're confirming everything that you're interacting with as well. So just something that I'd want to make sure. The other thing would be if you're using a Ledger Nano S, then you might need to use a third-party service, something like OpenSea. You connect your device to MetaMask and then to OpenSea or Rarible to actually send NFTs, specifically because there's an issue with space on the Ledger Nano S in particular. Let's keep going. Hopefully that does answer your question there, Quantum Variant. I know it's a little vague, but definitely possible to transfer NFTs in general. Tom Khan, hello again. Thanks again. We always try to do as many lives as we can. Sorry, you can't see my my tired face today. Hopefully, we'll be able to get that fixed for next time. Ron Hart, you've mentioned with regards to the, I'm assuming, similar issue that you mentioned before. You cleared the cache, then we suggested to edit and delete the application. Then I would be able to reinstall the app, but all the transactions and all the Ethereum have not. I'm just going to double check what you've written before, Ron. Boom, boom, boom. I remember seeing what you wrote previously, but it's not coming up there, Ron. When you if I take this in general, you've mentioned. There we go. I cleared the cache and then I was suggested edit and delete the app. Remember, you wouldn't be able to edit any applications. If you're editing, normally it might be the account, but then all the transactions and all the ETH have not. Ron, hopefully you can go into more detail there. I'm not sure if I remember exactly what you might have been talking about in particular, but generally speaking, if you're trying to remove transactions, it wouldn't be something you'd be able to do. You can definitely remove an account. So let's say if I get my just a random account here that I don't really use, you'd be able to go here, and that's to remove an account. But because transactions would be immutable, generally speaking, especially once they've been included on chain, you wouldn't be able to remove any transactions. So I'm feel like I'm shooting darts here. So if you can get me more details there, Ron, we can try and give you more of a hand. Elias Chu, you mentioned when the Ledger / or X MetaMask mobile would be available. No time frame, unfortunately. I'm super stoked to get to try and get that out into your guys' hands. I'm excited to get my hands on it as well, but no specific time frame, unfortunately. Next, Rets, thank you. No, thank you. Hopefully it gives you a better idea. Giacomo, you mentioned if Ledger Live does not support small tokens and not even my Ethereum wallet, the only way is to create an address on MetaMask using Ledger and send / buy the tokens to and from it. You can use, now it does depend because you're talking about tokens and whether or not tokens are supported, but also it would depend on whether the network is supported by, my Ethereum wallet. MetaMask does support custom RPCs, and I think we have a custom networks, I think it'll be called, in our help center. But that does add the ability to add custom networks that might not be supported in Ledger Live or my Ethereum wallet. So if that's what you mean specifically, then yes, MetaMask might be the best potential option, being that it does allow this feature. But if there would be potentially other ways of managing your assets, but most of them would involve entering your private keys or recovery phrase, which is not nearly ever something we'd consider as being safe or anything that we'd recommend. So that might be the generally best way if it isn't supported in Ledger Live and other potential wallets that you might use. I definitely use this feature a lot, and I would also, interact with specific sites directly. So we have 1inch in our Discover section, which I would have shown before, but there's also 1inch with regards to the actual website itself. So there's 1inch, there's Uniswap, of course, there's Paraswap. Paraswap's also in the Discover section as well. So a bunch of things that you can potentially consider using if you need to. Let's get rid of this guy. Hopefully, I wish I could give you more options there, Giacomo, and there's always, it's frustrating. I understand that there might not be potential ways to buy and sell specific assets that you might believe in, but it's definitely part of the learning process that I had experienced as well. So good luck on the journey too. Dill IY mentioned, 90% of the time trying to connect with a DApp with e-wallet connect on Ledger Live in the iOS mobile app. Okay, the option for the QR code scan does not come up. I can't switch from QR code URI to QR code scan. All up to date. Gotcha. Where would I go to follow up to check on this? What I might suggest, as always, our Twitter is always a gold mine in terms of latest up-to-date things. If you wanted to really get a hold of us to have a chat, you can actually even, Dill, mention my name as well. You can go to support.ledger.com. Just mention you wanted to speak to me in particular, and they'll get their case assigned eventually via email through to me when they're able to as well. But I would, definitely hope to see exactly what you might be seeing. See if we can try and get that fixed up for you and go from there. Definitely, maybe 10% of the time it comes up. Definitely weird. One of the other things I'd be wanting to think of, Dill, is if you're always connecting via for Ethereum mainnet, or if it might be like Polygon or some other network that you're connecting with. That's probably the other thing that I'd be thinking about in particular. Next, we have Rama. You've mentioned, how can I get rid of NFTs being airdropped onto Ledger or to an address? Because remember, they're not being airdropped onto your Ledger device. It's your Ledger address that's managed by your Ledger device, Ledger wallet, or Ledger address, sorry. Ledger managed address is normally the wording that I'd be using. Now, with that being said, you wouldn't want to actually touch any of these NFTs on chain. And it's part of the Help Center article that I was on before, in that you might see NFTs coming into your address, might see NFTs actually leaving your address as well. And that's another thing that I'll get into in a second. But you wouldn't want to be interacting with any of these ever. Now, why is that? It's because an NFT, has its own code that someone might have deployed onto Ethereum, onto Polygon, whatever it might be. Now, if you've actually interacted with a token, you actually call the code for that token's transfer, for that token's, mint function, whatever it might be. And when you do so, it could call other potential things. It could call like an approve for all function, something like that. And in that way, they'd be trying to have you compromise the security of your assets. So in that way, we would never recommend that you'd get rid of them, that you'd touch them, send them. All we'd mention is that you'd want to hide the NFT. And that wouldn't be an on-chain transaction. If you go to a block explorer, you could actually see this still at your address, but we would never recommend touching the NFT on-chain. It's definitely something that might seem annoying. You can just keep on reporting them on if you're looking on OpenSea or Rarible, whatever it might be. But again, we would never recommend it touching them on-chain. It could compromise the assets at that address. Sorry, we can't, get rid of them in particular. It wouldn't really work in that way, but hopefully that does put your mind at ease a little bit. With regards to when they're being sent from your address, wouldn't necessarily mean that they have access to, your recovery phrase or your private keys. But when they're sent from your address, essentially what happens is that the owners of the NFT, so some person that has the ability to sign transactions and make changes for those NFTs, is able to select, let's say, transfer from. It's a type of function where they're able to select the from address and the to address. And because it's the NFT that they might have, quote unquote, admin privileges for, to put it simply, they're able to call that transfer from function to put it as if it's your address. So again, as long as you haven't input your recovery phrase anywhere, it's not generally something that I'd worry about. It is definitely concerning, and I would totally understand coming to us to actually look at it, but not something, as long as you've kept your recovery phrase safe, that I would necessarily be worried about. Let's keep going. Ron Hart, you followed up. You have an Ethereum deposit that wasn't in your transactions. You asked support, and they said to first try clearing cache. And if that didn't work, to edit and delete the account, so then you can reinstall the account. Is it possible that you've lost the Ethereum? If the Ethereum deposit wasn't in your transactions, yes, the first thing I would first check is the transaction ID. I would always go to, so just to give you an idea of how I would normally troubleshoot these, jump on Etherscan, let's say it's an Ethereum mainnet transaction, and to check it there. Now, what if it's not on Ethereum Etherscan? It might be on Optimism, it could be on Arbitrum, it could be on, I don't know, maybe even like ZK Sync Era, for example. And we'd have to go, or would want to go to these other block explorers just to make sure. We want to essentially make sure and check the transaction has been deposited at the address that you expect. And then the next thing would be is we can jump onto your instance of Ledger Live, and we want to check the accounts that you have added. So I don't want to necessarily show my account, but you can go here, you can go to Ethereum, you can go to my Ethereum account, and then you can go to edit account up here. And what that'll do is it'll bring up the address in one way, or you can just go through the receive process. Those are the two ways. I always suggest going through the receive process because that way what you actually have to do, and I can actually do this now, is you would Ledger Live actually checks against the recovery phrase and or the private keys, and I'll get to the difference between those later, that are on the device, to make sure that the recovery phrase that you've set up the device with is the correct one. Now, why would I do that? Let's say, I have multiple recovery phrases, I have multiple passphrases, multiple devices, whatever they might be. I may get them confused. I may have written down my recovery phrase incorrectly, something like that. And it would deterministically give me access to a different set of addresses. So this way you at least make sure that everything's set up on your Ledger device correctly. And once you've matched the address, if you've matched the address that you're getting in Ledger Live against the address that you can see in your transaction history on Etherscan, for example, then there might be something wrong with the data that's being gotten from the blockchain or the infrastructure for Ledger Live. We could double check that by maybe double checking on MetaMask or Rabby or Tahoe to make sure that they both are lining up. But if they're not lining up, then it's about trying to figure out where that discrepancy lies and going from there. So if I reread, Ron, your first mention, you cleared the cache, it was says to delete the app, then I would be able to reinstall the app, but all transactions and all the others have not appeared, I'm assuming. Yes. Other than that, that's the first thing that I would be considering, is whether the transaction history matches what you are seeing in Ledger Live. or any other wallet that you might be using to manage an asset in particular. So first thing would be transaction ID. Second thing would be double checking the network, is normally my line of questioning there. We're a little over halfway through. I just wanted to mention, guys, if you guys have any questions, please, you can pop them in the chat. My name's Felix. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have with regards to Ledger devices, anything like that. Can't see me today, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll get that fixed for tomorrow, or next week rather. Please, I always mention, don't give out your 24 words and don't sign any transactions you don't trust. But I hope that that has been beaten into you by now. I definitely know I probably mention it too often, and we'll keep answering your questions throughout the rest of the time here. Now, next question I have is from Alexander B.A. You mentioned, hello, is it possible to explain who you reconfirm, or I'm assuming how you reconfirm a Hedera address after restoring your Ledger device? All right, so part of that also would require some knowledge, and I'll give this to you now, is that when you're creating an account, you do so via hashback. And why would that be? I'm not sure if you'd be aware, but part of it would also be that HBAR, Hedera, there is no actual deterministic link between the public-private key pair and your actual address that you'll get, right? So the other thing I remember that you would be told when you're creating the address or creating your account in your HBAR account and Hedera account, is that you'd want to definitely keep that address. That's your unique name that you'd then be able to restore onto the account. Actually, if I go about and I just do this now, might be able to give us a test as to how that might work in practice. Because I remember I do have one here. Let's get rid of this bad boy. Let's go to there, remove, and remove it. So let's say I've just restored my Ledger device with my existing recovery phrase, added a passphrase if I need to, which is a different thing from the recovery phrase. Let's add the account, and we can just go about and do that from there. We're going to make sure that my HBAR is, my device is set up with the correct recovery phrase, passphrase, and my HBAR app rather is open. So let's get that open. Let's go Hedera, and I do see that question for you, Ron, so I'll get that answered once I get this all added in as well. Let's go. I'm just going to type in Hedera. You can see that come up. And I'm going to wait for that to finish loading. Whenever it likes. Then we can continue. Now it's going to check the device for the public key. It's going to find the account, and I can add the account. I'm just going to name it whatever, that's fine. And it's successfully added. So that's how you would, go about and re-add your account in Ledger Live. And then you can go about and go through the receive process to actually confirm the address after you've restored your device. In fact, if you still have the account added, you don't even need to do what I did of deleting the account. You can actually just go about and go through the receive process straight away. So hopefully that answers your question, Alex. Definitely let us know if you have any more. Ron, let's get up to you. Ram, thank you for the question as well, just to give you a heads up. But Ron, you mentioned, should you restore from a new device or recover from a 24-word phrase? What's the difference? There's no such thing as restoring from a new device, but what I hope you mean, or what I think you mean, would be setting up as a new device or restoring from an existing 24-word recovery phrase. Setting up as a new device would give you a new recovery phrase that would have access to a new set of addresses. Restoring from an existing recovery phrase would mean that you'd get access to the same addresses that you would have had access to previously. So let's say, for example, I set all of these up with a recovery phrase A, I reset my device, and I now get recovery phrase B. These accounts would still appear within Ledger Live, but when I go in and I try to manage these assets, so I know that the device that I have with me is set to these these accounts. If I go in here and I go through the receive process for this address in particular, I will get a message that says wrong private keys for account. So let's go, and I'll go through this process, and you'll see exactly that the private keys don't match what was used to create this account. So that would be the difference. You see here, wrong is set up with the recovery phrase or passphrase associated with the selected account. So we just got to make sure I am managing it with the right recovery phrase. So that's the difference. You get a new recovery phrase that would manage new assets, new addresses rather, as opposed to restore from a 24-word phrase that would manage the same recovery phrase that you'd have before. So hopefully that answers that question. When you restore, when you set up as a new device or recover from an existing 24-word recovery phrase. Giacomo, you've asked, what is the worst mistake we can make with the ledger, apart from giving away the recovery phrase? The seed phrase is another way to mention it. I would say another thing that you could do is signing transactions on a phishing site. And that leads into something called blind signing, where when you're using new services, they may not be integrated into specific standards of how to show the specific transaction parameters that you're going to sign for. What do I mean by that? So if I'm sending, actually I can go back here. If I'm sending an ERC20 token, let's say if I go to this address, I have, Compound and USDC. These ERC20 tokens have a standard for what constitutes the transaction. It could be that I would need to have a to address, so who's receiving the amount that I'm transferring, and so on and so forth. But that would be what's required in general as a standard for the transfer function. Now, with that being said, if you're blind signing these new services and apps, just because you sign the transaction doesn't mean that you'd be able to know the exact parameters of that transaction, all right? And so when you turn on blind signing, you could be messing with, let's say, one of my favorites, GMX. You can sign with GMX, for example, but blind signing would have to be enabled because it's not something that you would do within Ledger Live. We wouldn't know what the exact parameters are able to be there for, right? So that's kind of what I would mean about signing transactions you don't trust. I say it all the time, is because when you have transactions on a phishing site, for example, they might ask you to turn on blind signing. You don't know what you're signing. It's just a bunch of hex that you can confirm. Even though it's hex on your Ledger screen in particular, doesn't mean that you would be able to understand the hex and understand exactly what you're signing. So that's the other big mistake, is just signing transactions or signing messages on random websites that may be trying to phish you. That's the other thing that I normally mention. So that's the other thing that I would think about in particular. Alexander, you mentioned that you restore with your 24 words and another key. So you restored your recovery phrase or seed phrase with another Ledger device. Is that right? And now Ledger tells you that the address is not verified. I'm not sure what you might mean by that. There would be one thing that would be mentioned in particular, that if that's the case, that there is a very strongly worded warning. And that's part of the reason that I mentioned that there is no direct relation between the public-private key pair and your Hedera address. It's because it's actually a relation that's actually set in a centralized database by Hedera for that in particular, and that connection isn't. Yes, exactly right, Alexander. The exact error message there is specifically trying to say, so I'll read out the message. It says, your Hedera address cannot be confirmed on your Ledger device. Use at your own risk. It means because there's no direct relation between the public and private key pairs and that address, and that it's an arbitrary relationship between that public address, Hedera address that you have, and the public key that you have on your Ledger device. That's why we have such a strong message, because it is something that we want you guys to be aware about, that it is potentially something that could affect you. So please understand the risk that's involved, and the risk would be that if someone were to have access to your device, so device being your laptop, your PC, that they could potentially change what would appear there. So that direct relation is something that you would have for Ethereum, for Bitcoin, for EVM chains, for example. But because Hedera works in a different way, it doesn't. We cannot confirm that relationship. That is exactly. I know it's really scary, and most of the time it shouldn't be something that you're affected by. But because there is no direct relation, we cannot confirm that on your Ledger device in particular. That's why. I know it's definitely reach out to us if you have more questions about it. I know it's a very complex topic, but in general, that's the basis of it. That you cannot confirm it because the relationship is actually one that's done when you sign up with Hashpack, for example. Ron Hart, you've mentioned unbelievable. I do see that in particular. Hopefully I can help you further. If you wanted to reach out to us, support.ledger.com, or you can mention your case number with us. I do want to make sure that we can help you with any issues that you might have. It is on the case though that, if you don't have, let's say, the exact recovery phrase or to deterministically get the exact address, we might not be able to help because it's not something that we do have on our end. But I definitely want to try and help as best we can. So definitely reach out or drop the case number if you have it into the chat. I'll try and pick it up and we'll have a look at that for you, Ron. Now, getting up towards the time where we might be finishing up, definitely try to pop your questions in the chat. If you guys have any more, we'll try to answer them as best we can and go from there. Definitely always super keen to talk more about, anything to do with Ledger, anything to do with any problems that you might be having. Thanks, Alex, for the question as well. Always happy to help. Always happy to go through things with you in particular. But if you guys have any more questions, we're always here. There's going to be another, if I remember correctly, there should be a Twitter live tomorrow. What day is it today? Thursday as well. And hopefully you guys can ask your questions there if you prefer that. And we always try to do everything, as many lives as we can throughout the week. I think last thing that I might mention is that we may not have something on the Monday, being that it is a public holiday here in France, but we'll continue on next week for Tuesday as well, Wednesday, and going forward too. So If you want, you can join us there on Twitter. You can always get a hold of us on Twitter at Ledger and at Ledger_support. Please be very, very careful of all of the potential scammers. We'll never ask you for your 24 words. We'll never ask you to DM or anything like that as well. Definitely something that we want you guys to avoid. Make sure you always can keep your assets secure. Being that it's a little quieter today in terms of questions, we might just end it there, as if you guys don't have anything else you wanted to chat with us about. And yeah, tune in tomorrow if you'd like, and have a good rest of the week. Stay safe in the markets out there, guys. Thanks.